Hey folks, welcome to the fifth mini lecture on the brain. Last time we met, we were talking about the primary somatosensory cortex, which was right here in the postcentral gyrus. And right behind it is this region in the parietal lobe called the somatosensory association cortex. So it's a bunch of gyri and sulci that are right back here. And this is where we're going to take the information about touch from the somatosensory cortex, but also information from vision, information from our auditory cortex and other brain parts to let us figure out exactly what we are feeling. And I mean feeling like touching, not feeling like emotionally. So this is where we start to figure out what we're touching. So, if you had these coins in your pocket, you could stick your hand in there and touch them. And because of experience in memory, you could figure out what kind of coins you were touching. And your somatosensory association cortex would be at work there. All right, moving on to a brand new lobe. In the temporal lobe, we are going to find the primary auditory cortex. So right up here next to the lateral sulcus, superior part of the temporal lobe, right there. And when sound waves excite the neurons in your inner ear, they're going to send electrical signals that eventually reach this cortex. And this is where you first register sound. Then there will be other areas in the temporal lobe that are involved in figuring out exactly what you're hearing. All right, moving right on through. Near that primary auditory cortex is an area called Wernicke's area. After this handsome guy down here, they want to cover him up. Let's see, there he is. And Wernicke's area, it's not surprising that it is near the primary auditory cortex because it is what is involved in understanding both written and spoken language. All right, let's keep going. Let's find some more brain areas and what they do. If you are kind of looking on the inside, like the bottom-ish, medial-ish part of the temporal lobe, that is where you are going to find the olfactory cortex. So we know we have olfactory epithelium in the superior nasal cavity. They bind chemicals that are in the air. Signals are then sent via nerve fibers. Remember those bipolar neurons that went through the cribriform plate? That pathway is eventually going to go to your olfactory cortex, where you start registering things that you're smelling. Now, interestingly and surprisingly, the olfactory cortex plays significant roles in both memory and your emotional state. All right, next up, we're jumping backwards to our occipital lobe. In our occipital lobe, we have our primary visual cortex. It's like the backest of the back, the occipitalist of the occipital lobe, that portion right there. So light is going to hit the rods and cones in your retina, electrical signals are going to be sent back, and eventually that pathway leads to the primary visual cortex in this occipital lobe. This is where we first register the things that we're seeing. We're seeing something. This is not where we know exactly what it is and interpret it yet, but we start to see it. By the way, this is the biggest of our sensory cortices, the biggest sensory cortex we got. Okay, let me know if I'm going too fast on this one, all right? Let's keep going. If I look at this, I can actually see the pathway from eyeball all the way to occipital lobe, the primary visual cortex. Now, what's kind of interesting is the contralateral nature here. Earlier, we talked about muscle control being contralateral, in that the right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of your body. The sense of touch is also going to be contralateral, as is the sense of hearing. The eye is a little bit weird. Each individual eye is not contralateral, but your field of view is. What you see in the left side of your field of view goes to the right side of your occipital, the right occipital lobe, and what you see on the right side goes to the left. So it's similar but a little bit different. Okay, near the primary visual cortex, in fact, just anterior to it, is this big part of the occipital lobe, which is called the visual association area. Now, this is where we really start to interpret those things that we are seeing. All right. Cool. Let's talk about the insula. The insula, that hidden fifth lobe, if you forgot what it was, it's that hidden fifth lobe tucked behind the temporal one. One of the major cortices in the insula is the gustatory cortex. That is where you are going to begin your sensation of taste. All right, by the way, this is a great picture to study. I mean, you should be aware of all of these different cortices. These are basically all the ones that we've done. All right, on that note, we're done with the cortex. We're done with the outside of the cerebrum. So in all of these areas we were just doing, areas and cortices, they were all this gray matter part of the cerebrum. Now we have to talk about, are these islands of gray matter, one, and then these guys here, little guy down here, these are called the basal nuclei. They're basal because they're deep. They're nuclei because they are clusters of cell bodies. In other words, they're gray matter. Now, some of these nuclei, so basically these guys right here, the big triangle one, and this little guy at the top, these are involved primarily in movements. The guy at the top here is the caudate nucleus, and then we have the putamen, the globus pallidus, and those two combined make the lentiform nucleus because they're kind of lens-shaped. These guys are all involved in movements. They're involved in planning movements, in making sure that movements are smooth. So making sure you're starting the movement and stopping it in a smooth, controlled manner. They're also involved in learned behaviors, kind of like what we talked about with the premotor cortex, like tying your shoes or playing a musical instrument or a particular sporting activity. If you're a good golfer, your golf swing is a learned pattern movement. Now, there is another guy down here called the amygdala, or the amygdaloid body. Amygdaloid means like an almond, so shaped like an almond. It is very much involved in your emotions and your moods, particularly in your sensation of fear. Can you imagine what it would be like if you did not have a functioning amygdala? Okay, time to talk white matter. There are three basic types of white matter, and before we even get to that, white matter, of course, is myelinated axons. Myelinated axons are sending electrical signals, so white matter is going to connect different parts of your brain. And based on where the connections are, we're going to get three different types of white matter. One type are these guys known as association fibers. They're the pink ones here. Association fibers stay within one hemisphere. They connect different parts of a single hemisphere. Now, from there, we can see these green guys. These are commissural fibers. Commissural fibers are going to connect the two hemispheres together. And then lastly, purple guys here are projection fibers. So they're going to connect our brain with our spinal cord. And we actually see the decussation happening with these projection fibers.